12 years. 12 years I sat by his hospital bed toddy, and they wrote me out in one sentence. They thought this was over. They had no idea what my father actually signed and tied. 3 weeks before he died, he whispered 4 words to me that day. Words my family never heard.
Please, protect it.
One tiny detail. One clause they never bothered to read. And it was about to change everything. They cut me out. But my father made sure I'd have the last word.
If you're watching this, you already know families can break your heart in ways strangers never could. Before we start, if stories like this move you, hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like Renata's. Now, let's begin. Renata Cole was 11 years old the first time she understood she was different in her father's house. Not because anyone said it outright, but because of the silences. Her mother had died when she was 6, and her father, Walter Cole, remarried within 2 years to a woman named Diane, who arrived with 2 children of her own, Preston and Marissa, both slightly older, both immediately favored in the small, invisible ways children notice long before adults admit them. Birthday cakes were bigger for Preston. New shoes came first for Marissa. Renata got hand-me-downs and the quiet expectation that she'd understand, because she was the strong one. She was the strong one. She had to be. By the time she turned 28, Renata had built a life that looked, from the outside, entirely her own. A modest apartment across town, a steady job as a physical therapist, a life quietly separate from the family that had never quite made room for her. She visited her father on Sundays. She called him every Wednesday night. She sent him funny videos of dogs because he never learned how to find them himself. Diane tolerated these visits with a thin smile. Preston and Marissa barely acknowledged them at all, busy building lives of luxury off inheritances they hadn't earned yet but already spent in their minds. Then Walter got sick. It started as fatigue, the kind everyone brushes off until it doesn't go away. Then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 3, aggressive. The kind of news that rearranges a family's priorities in an instant, except in the Cole household, it did something different. It revealed exactly who everyone already was. Diane cried beautifully at the hospital, performing grief for an audience that included the extended family, and later, for lawyers. Preston visited twice in 6 months, each time asking pointed questions about the house and what Dad's plans were. Marissa didn't visit at all, citing her demanding job at a marketing firm, though she found time to post filtered photos from a Cabo vacation 3 weeks after the diagnosis. Renata visited every single day. She learned the hospital's shift schedule better than some of the nurses. She learned which pillow arrangement eased her father's back pain, which nurse to ask for when the pain meds needed adjusting, which quiet jokes could make him laugh even through nausea. She took unpaid leave from her job when the paid leave ran out. She sold her car and used the money to cover parking fees and hospital cafeteria meals that added up faster than anyone warns you they will. She held his hand through chemotherapy sessions that left him unable to speak for hours afterward. She was there, not performing devotion, just living it, quietly, every single day, for 11 months. Walter noticed. Of course he noticed. In his lucid hours, he'd squeeze her hand and say, "You didn't have to do all this, Ren." And she'd say the same thing every time. "I know, Dad, I wanted to." 3 weeks before he died, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon with sunlight cutting gold through the blinds, Walter asked Renata to close the door. His voice was thin, but his eyes were sharp, sharper than they'd been in weeks, as if some final reserve of clarity had surfaced for this one conversation. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to listen carefully, because I won't have the strength to say it twice." He told her about a life insurance policy he'd taken out 15 years earlier. One Diane didn't know existed, one that predated their marriage and had never been folded into any joint estate planning. He told her he'd updated the beneficiary designation on that policy just 2 months prior, quietly, during a hospital visit from his old attorney, a man named Harold Whitfield, who had known Walter since college and owed him a debt of loyalty that had nothing to do with Diane or her children. The The policy was worth $850,000, and the sole beneficiary was Renata. "They're going to leave you out of the will," Walter said. And it wasn't a question, it was an apology. "I've seen how Diane talks. I know what she's planning. I can't stop what happens to the house or the accounts we share because those go through her and the will, and she's had a lawyer rewriting things behind my back for months. I let her, because fighting her would have cost me the little time I have left with all of you in the same room. But this?" He tapped the folded paper in her hand, the policy documents Harold had helped him print quietly, away from Diane's watchful presence. "This isn't part of the estate. Whitfield made sure of it. This is separate. This is yours, no matter what the will says." Renata read that folded page in the hospital room, her hands shaking, and understood for the first time that her father had seen everything, every quiet exclusion. Every year she'd been treated as an afterthought, and had spent his final months making sure the people who dismissed her would never get the chance to erase her too. Walter died 17 days later, with Renata holding his hand. The will reading happened 2 weeks after the funeral, in a downtown law office with dark wood paneling and a view of rain-slicked streets. Diane arrived in black Chanel, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Preston wore a suit that cost more than Renata's monthly rent. Marissa scrolled her phone until the attorney, not Harold Whitfield, but Diane's own lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Gregory Pierce, cleared his throat and began reading. The house went to Diane. The investment accounts went to Diane. A trust fund, established years earlier and quietly expanded, split between Preston and Marissa. And then came the sentence Renata had somehow already braced herself for, though hearing it aloud still landed like a physical blow. "To my stepdaughter, Renata Cole, I leave nothing, as she has chosen a path separate from this family." The room went still. Diane didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. She looked satisfied, like a woman who'd finally gotten what she'd spent a decade maneuvering toward. Preston smirked at his phone. Marissa didn't look up at all. Renata felt something crack open in her chest, not surprise. She'd expected this, but a grief so total it momentarily stole her breath. She thought of every Sunday visit, every Wednesday call, every night spent on a hospital cot instead of her own bed. She thought of her father's hand in hers as the machines beeped their slow countdown, and she thought, they don't even know what they don't know. She stood, smoothed her cardigan, and said only, "Thank you for your time," before turning to leave. That's when Gregory Pierce's assistant knocked and entered, holding a sealed envelope addressed not to the estate but specifically to Renata Cole, delivered that morning by courier from a separate firm, Whitfield and Associates. "I'm sorry," the assistant said, looking between the stunned faces in the room. "This came in separately. It's not part of the will. It's a life insurance disbursement notice." Diane's smile faltered for the first time. Renata opened the envelope at the table in front of all of them because some small, tired part of her wanted them to see it happen in real time. Inside was a letter from Harold Whitfield, confirming the policy, confirming the beneficiary change dated 2 months before Walter's death, confirming that as a named beneficiary on a policy held entirely outside the estate, the funds, $850,000, would be dispersed directly to Renata, untouched by probate, untouched by the will, untouched by anything Diane's lawyer had spent months carefully rewriting. "That's not possible," Preston said, standing so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That has to be part of the estate." "Life insurance proceeds with a named beneficiary bypass the will entirely," Gregory Pierce said quietly, not looking pleased about it but unable to argue the law. "It's a fairly standard exclusion. I wasn't aware this policy existed." "He hid it from us," Diane said, her voice rising, all pretense of grief gone now, replaced by something colder and more familiar. "He hid it and gave it to her." "He didn't hide anything from you that was yours to know," Renata said, and her voice was steady in a way that surprised even her. "He protected the one thing you couldn't touch, because he saw what all of you never let yourselves see, that I was the only one who actually showed up." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and walked out of that office into the rain, and for the first time in 11 months, she let herself cry. Not from grief this time, but from something closer to release. In the months that followed, Renata didn't disappear into bitterness, though she had every reason to. She used a portion of the money to finally open the small physical therapy practice she'd dreamed about for years, one specializing in post-surgical and cancer recovery patients. Built from everything she'd learned sitting beside her father through 11 months of treatment. She named it, quietly, after him. She kept the rest in careful, patient savings, the kind her father had always encouraged, the kind that builds a life instead of just filling a moment. Diane, Preston, and Marissa reached out exactly twice in the year that followed, both times when their portion of the estate ran thinner than expected, both times with a tone that suggested Renata owed them an apology for a windfall she hadn't asked for and hadn't hidden. She didn't respond to either message, not out of spite, but because she finally understood something her father had spent his final weeks trying to teach her without saying it directly, that being family isn't a birthright people get to invoke only when convenient. It's built day by day in the unglamorous, unrewarded moments nobody's watching. The Wednesday phone calls, the Sunday visits, the hospital cots, the quiet hand-holding at 3 a.m. when the pain medication hasn't kicked in yet. Walter Cole had seen who actually loved him, underneath all the performances and the maneuvering and the Chanel-clad grief. And in the one part of his legacy no lawyer could rewrite, and no sibling could contest, he made absolutely sure the world would know it too. Renata still visits his grave every Sunday. She brings dog videos, even now, and reads the captions out loud like he's there to laugh at them. And every time someone asks her how she found the strength to keep showing up for a family that so rarely showed up for her, she says the same thing her father used to say, the words that had somehow become his final gift to her, hidden in plain sight all along. You do it because it's right, not because it's noticed. Sooner or later, it gets noticed anyway.